Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Reference Wednesdays. Thus far, I've made videos that were structured around a particular figure drawing related topic and gave you guys my best tips on how to approach that topic. But for this video, I wanted to do something slightly different, very slightly, but yeah, it's going to be a longer video and the topic is going to be a bit different from the ones that I've done before. So I started this video series initially to make sure that I do at least one dedicated photo study session per week, which is something I have not done much in the past at all, but want to make up for now, which I think is pretty good practice. So this is going to be kind of like a draw with me, let's study type of session. So let's go. In this video, I'll be using Studio Graphite's Clothing Textures Reference Pack Volume 2. This pack has a variety of gorgeous and dynamic photos of flowing fabric. The model is wearing some elf costumes, and the photos are an excellent research to study soft fabric in motion. If you want to obtain this pack or any other reference packs from Studio Graphite, please check out my description below for the link and a 20% off discount code, which is a steal, by the way, because these photos are really good reference material. So, alright, so clothing is something I absolutely love to draw, one of my favorite aspects of character design and character art in general, honestly. I actually considered going to university or college for fashion back in the day, and I still feel like that would have probably been a pretty good choice in another life, but yeah. Anyway, even though I love clothes, I have always kind of neglected to properly study folds and different fabric textures. And so in this session, I did 6 studies altogether, starting with one quick 10-minute warm-up just to get my hands to feel less stiff, followed by 3 studies that took about 15 minutes each, a longer 25-minute study, and lastly, a more focused 30-minute study. I'll be talking about some things that came to mind during the study session and sharing a bunch of tips in no particular order that resulted from me just thinking about the study session. I'll also make this episode longer than usual and leave some gaps with music. Probably. I encourage you to get some tea and have a little study session along with me. So firstly, I picked a stationary pose for the warm-up just because those tend to be a little bit easier. Pretty much right away, I realized that the biggest difference between this session and the previous ones I've been doing for the past few weeks is that these costumes hide a lot of the body, which is a complication that I'm sure many of you also find a bit more challenging. A classic student mistake when it comes to costumed figure drawings is when the figure starts to fall apart underneath the clothes, making the person look stiff and sometimes disjointed, or even worse, extraordinarily short, or just generally weird and messed up in proportions. So I'm just going to share some thoughts on how to avoid these common pitfalls. The main difficulty here also happens to be a really good opportunity to practice what you've learned from studying unclothed figures. Like I've mentioned in my previous videos, it's pretty important to make sure you avoid the autopilot copying at all costs. One of the best ways to do that when studying these types of photos is to very lightly map out where you think the body is underneath all the fabric. This will definitely prevent your brain from going on autopilot mode and keep it very engaged. In this particular case, since the costume covers a lot of the legs, I will generally look for the feet early on in the process and mark them down approximately. Obviously, I do this after lightly mapping out the torso first and the head, sometimes the arms as well. A good practice is to measure the distance between a ton of different elements within the photo with your eyes. I'm sure I've mentioned this before, but it's never a bad idea to mention this many times going forward. So take note of any negative space that shows through, and take mental notes of where the space is in relation to other body parts like hands, etc. The more you practice eyeballing distance between various parts of the image, the more skill you will gain to map out accurate proportions. This also helps with backgrounds as well, so it's a pretty well-versed or easily applicable skill in other aspects of art, any aspect really. So anyway, I would encourage you to draw some imaginary legs and judge for yourself if their position is plausible. Do they look believable? If the answer is yes, then great. If not, try something else and see if it works better. This will really help you develop the necessary skill of integrating the knowledge you gain from doing figure studies into sketching without reference. Doing this is somewhere in between. By doing this, I mean trying to figure out what's underneath the clothes as opposed to using a reference to just study a figure that you can easily see. With enough studying, you'll be able to draw the human figure without a reference from pretty much any angle, and it's not that crazy a difficult achievement either. It's definitely attainable. To me, it's the ultimate goal, and I would say pretty confidently that I can do this to a large degree. Maybe not any angle, but I can do a lot at this point for sure without a reference. So references are great, but not using them sometimes is also a great thing. So yeah, something to contemplate. So I'm gonna move on to the next thing that I thought about / the next tip. I want to talk about the idea of flow, which I love. I love flowing elements in my drawings, in any drawings really. If you really want to get a good grasp on this concept, I actually recommend briefly looking into an animation principle called the S&C curve. When I studied traditional animation in college, one of the first assignments was to animate a book page turn back and forth, which I know sounds like one of my tangents that are completely irrelevant, but honestly, I think it's just crucial to understand this concept. I'm pretty sure I had a decent intuitive grasp on how to draw flowing hair and other such things before, but learning how to animate a smooth wave-like motion really took it to the next level for me. The interesting thing about animation is that it's really so far removed from drawing and draftsmanship as a skill. The thing that you need to learn in order to create convincing sense of movement are just they're so completely different. It's like an entirely different skill set. And my point is, there is so much beauty in nature and natural movement, and understanding how this movement works on a technical level and how to recreate it with, I don't know, animating, I guess. I'm struggling to form a proper sentence here, but yeah, understanding how a wave moves will really aid your ability to capture that sort of dynamic beauty and movement in a still drawing. So I said flow initially, but really a drawing that has flow is a dynamic drawing, and a dynamic drawing is the opposite of a static and stiff drawing. So now we're talking about avoiding stiffness and how to capture movement in still images. It's something that I wanted to talk about because I have noticed that a lot of people have asked me to talk about this particular topic before, so I'm just going to briefly touch on it here because it is something that came up while I was doing this study session. So remember I mentioned the S&C curves? Well, something I do all the time in this particular case in regards to the fabric, is to notice clear S and C curves in the skirts. I think this point is so important that I will make a little video segment showing you guys where these S and C curves are. Just a quick draw over the stuff that I have to demonstrate what I'm talking about, just in case it's totally unclear. So yeah, I was learning copperplate calligraphy a couple of years ago and was pleasantly surprised that in calligraphy there is a line called the universal line of beauty. And how true! It's an S-curved line, and it really is a very, very pleasing to the eye type of line. So this, I don't know, I guess it's kind of tangential, but it does have to do with what I'm talking about. So in the case of costumed figure drawing with movement, looking for the main line of action and then a bunch of secondary lines that enforce the feeling of movement is essentially what will help you retain that sense of movement in your drawing. Hopefully that was a coherent sentence. You could organize details in a way that assists these secondary dynamic lines of action, and as long as you do not break them or obscure them too much, the sense of movement in your drawing will remain very pronounced. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is the methods of digital rendering and coloring that I happen to use in these studies specifically. So firstly, if you have seen some of my digital work walkthroughs, speed paints, whatever, you probably know that I'm not much of a painter per se. In other words, I have somewhat of a rigid process for completing artwork, especially for commercial purposes, that is both efficient and consistent, but like I said, kind of rigid. So in order to combat my tendency to lean towards excessive order, I take opportunities to introduce a bit of chaos, aka experimentation, to more casual artwork, such as these practice sessions. In this particular session, I tried a couple of brushes that I have never really tried before and accidentally stumbled upon a pretty neat trick that gives fabric a nice and textured look. If you are watching, you may have noticed that as soon as I am done with the lines, I select the dress silhouette and give it a flat color with a texture brush, building up a tone with a few passes, but making sure I still retain that textured look that the brush provides. So basically, if you do this and then lock the pixels on that layer, and then add shadows with a darker color on the same layer also, this texture will remain intact and not be painted over. I like it. It's a very nice look. Reminds me kind of J.C. Landecker, whom I am a very big fan of. One of my favorite artists for sure. Anyway, that was just a valuable little discovery for me. Thought I'd share it with you guys. And yeah, as for my rendering method, if you can call it that, I pretty much just opted for a lot of lasso tool usage. If you don't know what the lasso tool is in Photoshop, and I think all other painting programs / apps, drawing apps, whatever, have it as well, it's just a freehand area selection tool. The reason why I gravitated towards this method is because it saves a ton of time, and I am a very impatient person, believe it or not. I generally want instant results, so my process a lot of the time reflects that side of things, and I could stand to use the lasso tool more actually in my typical process as well, because I noticed that I don't use it that much and it really does save a ton of time. And I certainly will be incorporating it more from now on. So this brush I tried out, the oil number 3 or oil number 6 brush from Ahmed Aldoori's free brush pack. I can't remember which one it was exactly, but yeah, this is a really nice brush for blending. And I think I used the same brush to put the initial flat textured pass first. So I actually didn't even use the blender tool, which I typically rely on quite a bit to soften edges. But yeah, the combination of this nice smooth brush and using the lasso tool pretty much made up for that, and it is a pretty nice process. Anyways, yeah, the photos in this rough pack are really nice. Probably gonna revisit this one for fabric references in the future for like actual illustrations, because I can totally see myself wanting to do more of this kind of stuff in the future. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this slightly more relaxed video with some intermissions. I actually ended up putting more time into it than I anticipated, but that's okay. I just hope that you found it useful, and if you do or did, please share it with some art buddies who you think might also find it useful. I've been so happy to see a bunch of comments from you guys where you say that these types of videos and tips have helped you out a lot. It's very nice to hear and makes me very glad. So yeah, okay. Like I mentioned, if you want to check out this reference pack or any other by Studio Graffiti or Graffiti Studio, do check out my description below for the links and a 20% off discount code. So thank you for watching this episode of Reference Wednesdays, and I will see you next Wednesday. Wait, actually, I'm posting another video this week, so stay tuned.